The frozen river should have been silent. Instead, footprints appeared where no creature could possibly survive. Not one. Dozens. Huge white paw prints emerged from the moonlit ice before disappearing into the snowfall. The young Omega dropped the lantern she had carried to this river every winter for 12 lonely years. Everyone had always laughed at her. They said she was waiting for ghosts, tonight. Something had finally come back, and before dawn, the Alpha King's soldiers would kneel in the same snow where everyone once called her insane. But the question wasn't why the wolves had returned. The real question was, why had they returned only for her? Winter always arrived in Frostvale like an old king reclaiming his throne. The mountains disappeared beneath endless blankets of white. Pine forests stood motionless beneath layers of snow, so thick that even the strongest branches bowed beneath their weight. Every chimney in the kingdom exhaled gray smoke into skies that remained silver long after sunrise, and the sound of distant wolves usually vanished with the first heavy snowfall. People believed winter belonged to silence. Only one young woman believed it belonged to promises. Long before dawn, while the village still slept beneath frost-covered rooftops, Alara Ashwin quietly opened the worn wooden door of her small cottage. The cold greeted her like an old friend. She wrapped her faded gray cloak tighter around her shoulders before lifting the same weathered lantern she carried every year. Inside a leather satchel rested dried venison, healing herbs, and strips of smoked fish carefully prepared over many weeks. She checked each item twice, not because anyone expected her to, because someone once had. The snow crunched softly beneath her boots as she followed the narrow trail leading north. Every step felt familiar. She could have walked the path with closed eyes. 12 winters had carved it into both the forest and her memory. As she passed the marketplace, voices drifted through the frosted air. "The ghost hunter is leaving again." Another laughed. "No. She's feeding wolves that died before she was born." A third voice added more quietly, "Poor thing. If my parents abandoned me, I'd probably invent fairy tales too." Their laughter followed her only a few moments before the wind swallowed it. Alara never answered. She never had. The words still hurt. They simply hurt less than they used to. She continued walking. The eastern horizon slowly brightened, revealing towering pines whose branches glittered beneath fresh snow. Tiny birds darted, between them searching desperately for hidden seeds before another storm arrived. Alara paused beneath one tree. From her satchel, she scattered a handful of grain onto the snow. Several hungry birds landed almost immediately. "You remembered," she whispered with a faint smile. Kindness had become a habit no one noticed. That was all right. The forest noticed. Hours later, she reached the frozen river. It stretched across the valley like polished crystal, wide enough that the opposite shore disappeared behind drifting mist. Ancient cliffs surrounded the river on both sides, their frozen waterfalls sparkling beneath pale morning light. Most villagers refused to come here. The place carried too many stories. Old hunters claimed spirits crossed the river during the first snowfall. Children whispered that wolves could walk beneath the ice. Even warriors avoided camping nearby after dark. No one remembered why, only that they always had. Alara knelt near the riverbank. She brushed fresh snow away from a smooth stone that had become her silent companion. 12 small lines had been carved into its surface, one for every winter she had returned. She unpacked the dried meat and herbs before placing them carefully beside the stone. The wind carried snowflakes across the frozen surface. Nothing moved. Nothing ever did. Still, she smiled gently. "I came back." Her words disappeared into the endless white. Then, as always, memories found her. She was 9 years old again, terrified, alone. She remembered chasing her father's old lantern after a sudden gust carried it toward the river. Instead, she had discovered blood staining fresh snow. A white wolf lay trapped beneath shattered ice. Its breathing was shallow. One foreleg twisted unnaturally beneath its enormous body, even injured. It had been magnificent. Fear had told her to run. Compassion had refused. She had spent hours breaking frozen branches, pulling ice away with bleeding hands until the wolf could crawl free. When she finally stumbled backward in exhaustion, expecting the beast to disappear into the forest, it had walked toward her instead. The giant wolf lowered its head. Its forehead gently touched hers. Its icy blue eyes held something she had never forgotten. Not gratitude, recognition, as though it had been waiting to find her. Without a single growl, it crossed the frozen river where no ordinary wolf could possibly walk. Halfway across. It looked back one final time, then vanished into drifting snow. That single moment had changed everything. No one believed her story. Some called her a liar. Others claimed grief had made her imagine it after her parents disappeared later that same winter. Eventually, even kind people pitied her. But Alara never doubted what she had seen. She had made a promise. "I'll come back every winter," and promises mattered, especially when no one else remembered them. A sharp gust swept across the river, pulling her back into the present. The afternoon sky had darkened. Another snowstorm was coming. She stood, brushing frost from her gloves before lifting the empty satchel. "I suppose," she said softly to the silent river. "Maybe next winter." She turned toward the forest, then froze. Something had changed. The wind had stopped. The birds had gone silent. Even the falling snow seemed to hesitate. Slowly, very slowly. She looked back. There, pressed into untouched snow beside the offerings she had just left, was a footprint, larger than both her hands together. Fresh, perfectly shaped. A wolf's paw. Then another. Then another. A trail of enormous white paw prints stretched across the frozen river itself, appearing one by one as though invisible travelers were walking toward her through the moonlit ice. Alara's lantern slipped from trembling fingers. Its light rolled across the snow. Her heartbeat echoed louder than the wind. For 12 winters. Nothing had come. Tonight. Something finally had. Far across the endless white, a long, haunting howl rose into the darkening sky. Then another answered, and another. The frozen river was no longer empty. As the chorus of distant howls echoed across the valley, massive white shapes began emerging through the swirling snowfall, walking calmly over impossible ice toward the lone Omega who had never stopped waiting. The howl rolled across the frozen valley, with a power that seemed older than the mountains. Themselves, it wasn't a cry of hunger, nor was it a warning. It sounded like a greeting. Carried across centuries, Alara remained frozen where she stood, her lantern lying forgotten in the snow. Her breath caught in her throat as another shape appeared beyond the drifting curtain of white. Then another. Then another. They emerged without haste, walking across the river as though the thick ice welcomed every step. Moonlight shimmered beneath their paws, leaving faint silver ripples trapped inside the frozen surface before fading into darkness again. There were 7 of them, each larger than any wolf recorded in Frostvale's hunting journals. Their coats were pure white, untouched by age or dirt, blending almost perfectly with the snow except for their brilliant blue eyes that reflected the moon like polished crystal. None of them showed fear. None of them showed aggression. They walked with the calm certainty of creatures returning home. Alara's instincts whispered that she should run. Her heart refused. The largest wolf stepped ahead of the others. A jagged scar crossed his left eye, disappearing beneath thick winter fur. His shoulders stood nearly level with Alara's chest, and every movement carried quiet authority, rather than brute strength. This had to be their leader. The enormous wolf stopped, only a few steps away. Silence settled between them. Snow drifted gently through the space separating woman and beast. Neither moved. Neither looked away. Then something happened that no storyteller in Frostvale would have dared invent. The giant wolf slowly lowered his head behind him. Every other wolf did the same, not in surrender, in recognition. Alara's eyes widened. I don't understand. The scarred wolf lifted his gaze to meet hers. Those ancient blue eyes looked exactly as she remembered from 12 years ago. Recognition, not gratitude. Recognition, as if the promise made by a frightened little girl had never been forgotten. Carefully, she extended one trembling hand. If you're really the one I saved. Her fingers never reached him. The wolf closed the distance, himself. His massive forehead gently touched her, palm warm alive. Real, a single tear slipped down Alara's cheek. You came back. The great wolf released a low rumble that sounded almost like quiet. Contentment behind him. The remaining wolves spread across the snowy riverbank, sniffing the herbs and dried meat she had faithfully brought every winter. Not one rushed toward the food. Instead, each accepted only a small piece before sitting patiently, as though honoring the ritual rather than satisfying hunger. They remembered, Alara whispered. Far above the valley, hidden among frost-covered cliffs, another pair of eyes watched the impossible reunion. Captain Darius lowered the spyglass with trembling hands. I don't believe it. Beside him, 3 royal scouts stared speechlessly toward the river. They're bowing, one whispered. To an Omega. No. Darius corrected quietly. They're choosing her. Without another word, he turned his horse toward Frostvale Castle. The king needed to see this. The royal fortress stood high above the valley, carved directly into dark stone that had endured centuries of winter storms. Within its great hall, Alpha King Kaelin Frostmane listened in silence. As nobles argued around the council table, the southern packs demand more. Arain, the eastern border has reported rogue activity. The hunting reserves continue, shrinking. Every problem seemed larger than the last. Kaelin remained calm. His silver eyes studied maps rather than faces. He had learned long ago that kings who reacted quickly often ruled briefly. Only those who observed survived. The heavy doors burst open. Captain Darius entered. Still covered in snow, he dropped to one knee. My king. Kaelin looked up. You rode through the storm. I had no choice. The hall fell silent. What happened? Darius hesitated. Even speaking the words sounded foolish. The winter pack has returned. Laughter erupted around the chamber. Several nobles shook their heads. Impossible. Those beasts vanished centuries ago. Old hunter tales. Darius ignored them. They crossed the frozen river. Silence replaced laughter. Kaelin slowly stood. How many witnesses? My entire patrol. And? They bowed. The king frowned. To whom? Darius answered without hesitation. An Omega named Alara Ashwin. Murmurs spread throughout the chamber. Lady Seraphine leaned forward, amusement flickering across her elegant features. The abandoned girl? Yes. Then your patrol has been fooled. By snow and moonlight, Darius met her gaze without blinking. I know wolves. You know ordinary wolves, she replied. Coolly, Kaelin raised one hand. Instant silence. What else? Darius slowly reached inside his cloak. I recovered this after they left. He placed an object upon the council table. Bronze reflected the firelight, old, scratched, untouched by rust. Kaelin stopped breathing. His hand hovered above it before carefully lifting. The heavy medallion, the Frostmane crest, his family's royal seal, the leather cord remained. Exactly as he remembered, his father had worn it the morning he disappeared near the frozen river nearly 20 years earlier. It can't be, someone whispered. Kaelin turned the medallion over. On the back. 3. Familiar claw marks. marks he himself had accidentally carved during childhood while practicing with wooden wolf claws beside his father. No counterfeit could reproduce that memory. The room seemed suddenly colder. My father wore this. No one answered. Lady Seraphine recovered first. Perhaps a scavenger found it years ago. Kaelin studied the weathered leather. No. This was returned. He looked toward the snow-covered mountains beyond the great windows. The first time in many years, the stories he had dismissed as comforting myths, no longer felt impossible. Back at the frozen river, darkness settled over the valley. Alara gathered her empty satchel while the wolves watched. Quietly, she smiled nervously. I don't know if you'll understand me. Fen tilted his head. But it's too dangerous for you to stay here. The great wolf turned toward the forest. For a moment, Alara feared they were leaving again. Instead, Fen took several slow steps before looking back at her, waiting, as though inviting her to follow. Her heart pounded. The wolves had finally returned. But where were they trying to lead her? Alara followed the great white wolf into the moonlit forest, unaware that at that very same moment, Alpha King Kaelin had mounted his horse and begun riding toward the frozen river, carrying the medallion that should have been lost forever. Fen never hurried. He walked through the silent forest with the calm confidence of someone who had crossed the same path 1,000 times before. The other 6 white wolves followed in perfect silence, their paws leaving almost no trace despite the fresh snow that covered the ground. Alara kept several careful steps behind them. She did not know where they were going. Strangely, she trusted them more than she trusted her own fear. Above the towering pines, snow drifted gently through pale moonlight, transforming the forest into a world that seemed untouched by time. Frost shimmered across every branch like scattered stars, while the only sound was the soft rhythm of wolves moving through the snow. After nearly an hour, Fen stopped beside an abandoned stone watchtower almost completely buried beneath ice. Alara recognized it immediately. Every child in Frostvale knew the old tower. Parents warned their children never to come here. Hunters refused to camp nearby. Even warriors avoided it after sunset. No one remembered why, only that they always had. Fen looked toward the tower entrance, then back at Alara. Waiting. You want me to go inside? The great wolf blinked once. It felt almost like an answer. Alara stepped toward the broken doorway, brushing away thick layers of snow. Inside, everything lay frozen exactly as it must have centuries ago. Broken shields leaned against cracked walls. Rusted lanterns still hung from ancient hooks. Then she noticed something unusual. The wolves weren't looking at the tower. They were staring at the floor. She knelt. Half buried beneath frost lay an enormous stone engraved with a crescent moon surrounded by 7 wolves. As Alara brushed away the ice with her gloves, the carving slowly became visible. The moment her fingertips touched the center, a deep vibration echoed beneath the ground. The entire tower trembled. Snow cascaded from the ceiling. Ancient gears hidden beneath centuries of ice groaned back to life. The circular stone slowly slid aside. Cold blue light rose from the darkness below. Alara stumbled backward. I opened it. Fen simply stepped toward the hidden staircase, as though it had always been waiting. Miles away, hoofbeats thundered across frozen ground. King Kaelin rode through the storm with only Captain Darius and 6 royal guards. The wind whipped his dark cloak behind him, but his attention never left the ancient medallion resting in his hand. His father's medallion. For nearly 20 years he had believed it lost forever beneath the frozen river. Now it had returned. Not through a soldier, not through a hunter, through wolves. Nothing about it made sense. Captain Darius slowed his horse. My king. Kaelin looked ahead. Smoke, a small lantern, still burned near the riverbank where Alara had stood earlier. They were here, Darius whispered. Kaelin dismounted and knelt beside the untouched snow. Massive paw prints covered the frozen river, far larger than ordinary wolves. He placed his hand inside one of them. The track dwarfed his gloved fingers. "They're real." No one spoke. Even the guards looked uneasy. Suddenly, one soldier pointed toward the northern forest. "My king." Fresh tracks, human footprints, surrounded by enormous wolf prints, not chased, escorted. Kaelin stood immediately. "They're taking her somewhere." Captain Darius reached for his sword. "Should we prepare for battle?" Kaelin shook his head, if they intended to harm her. He glanced once more at the untouched offering still resting beside the river. They had every opportunity, for reasons he could not explain. He believed the wolves wanted them to follow. Deep beneath the tower, Elara descended carefully into the glowing darkness. The staircase spiraled endlessly through crystal walls unlike anything she had ever seen. Blue veins of ancient ice pulsed softly beneath the stone as though the mountain itself possessed a heartbeat. The air felt strangely warm despite the frozen surroundings. Not warm in temperature, warm in memory. The wolves walked ahead without hesitation. Finally, the staircase opened into an enormous cavern. Elara stopped breathing. An underground world stretched before her. Towering pillars of crystal ice reflected countless shades of silver and blue. Frozen waterfalls hung suspended in time, sparkling like enormous chandeliers beneath shafts of pale moonlight filtering through cracks far above. At the cavern's center stood dozens of stone pillars arranged in a great circle. Each pillar carried carvings unlike anything found in Frostvale. Humans. Wolves. Standing together. Not as masters and beasts, as equals. Elara stepped closer. Her fingers traced one weathered mural, a wolf placing its forehead against a young girl's, exactly as one had done with her 12 years earlier. This? Her voice barely escaped. This happened before. Behind her, Fen released a low rumble. Not warning, agreement. Footsteps echoed through the cavern entrance. The wolves immediately turned. Not hostile, alert, Kaelin emerged carrying a lantern. The king froze. His silver eyes slowly scanned the impossible chamber, crystal columns, ancient murals. 7 silent white wolves, and at their center, the young Omega every noble dismissed. Neither spoke. For several long moments, only the distant dripping of melting ice filled the cavern. Kaelin finally lowered his sword. "So," his calm voice echoed softly, "you found them." Elara almost laughed. "They found me." Their eyes met for the first time. Kaelin had expected someone desperate for attention. Instead, he found a woman quietly brushing snow from an ancient carving, completely unconcerned with impressing a king. Elara had expected a proud ruler surrounded by arrogance. Instead, she found a man who had entered a cave full of legendary wolves. Without drawing his blade, Fen walked calmly between them. The enormous wolf looked first at Elara, then at Kaelin, then gently nudged both toward the largest mural at the center of the chamber, as though introducing 2 strangers who were meant to see the same truth. Kaelin raised his lantern. The ancient painting slowly emerged from darkness. Hundreds of wolves stood beside warriors wearing the Frostmane crest, not fighting, protecting each other. Below the mural, weathered runes had survived the centuries. Elder Rowan's lessons returned faintly to Kaelin's memory. He translated the first line aloud. "Before there were kings," he swallowed. There was the promise of winter. The second line was far more unsettling. "The wolves did not betray the crown." Kaelin's heartbeat quickened. The final sentence had been deliberately scratched away centuries ago. Someone had wanted the truth forgotten. Fen stared silently at the damaged inscription, then turned toward an even darker tunnel disappearing deeper beneath the mountain. The wolves began walking once more. They were not finished revealing their secrets. As Alara and Kaelin followed the winter pack deeper beneath the mountain, an enormous stone door slowly emerged from the darkness. Across its frozen surface was carved the unmistakable image of a little girl standing between two kneeling white wolves, and the girl's face looked exactly like Alara's. The great stone door towered nearly 30 feet high. Its surface shimmered beneath a layer of crystal ice that had remained untouched for centuries. Moonlight filtered through cracks in the cavern ceiling, making the ancient carvings seem almost alive. Neither Alara nor Kaelin spoke. They simply stared. At the center of the enormous door stood the carved image of a little girl. She could not have been older than 9. Her hand rested gently against the forehead of a great white wolf, while 6 others knelt behind them beneath a full moon. Every detail felt impossible. The shape of her face, the loose braid over one shoulder, even the small crescent pendant hanging around her neck. Alara instinctively reached beneath her cloak. Her fingers wrapped around the silver pendant she had worn for as long as she could remember. The carving wore the same one, Kaelin noticed. His sharp eyes moved silently from the pendant around Alara's neck to the one carved into stone. That isn't coincidence. Alara slowly shook her head. I've never seen this place before. Fen stepped toward the door. The great wolf lowered his scarred head before touching the frozen stone with his nose. A deep vibration rolled through the cavern, one by one. Every wolf followed. The chamber echoed with low, harmonious growls that sounded less like voices and more like an ancient song remembered after centuries of silence. The ice covering the door began to melt, not from heat, from light. Silver lines spread across the carvings until hidden runes slowly appeared beneath the frost. Elder Rowan would have fallen to his knees if he had witnessed it. The language belonged to the first winter. A language believed lost long before Frostvale had kings. Kaelin stepped closer. He recognized only scattered symbols. Alara, however, felt something stranger. She couldn't read the words. Yet somehow, she understood their meaning, almost as if memories slept beneath the sound. Without realizing it, she whispered the first sentence aloud. A promise freely kept shall open what fear has sealed. Her own voice startled her. Kaelin looked at her in disbelief. You can read it? No. I don't know how I said it. The wolves remained perfectly still, waiting. More words slowly appeared. This time, Kaelin managed to understand several symbols. Only. The faithful. He paused. May awaken the crossing. The final line glowed brighter than the rest. Alara stepped closer. Her fingertips barely touched the ancient stone. 12 winters remembered. A soft wind swept through the chamber. The enormous door slowly opened. Not outward, inward. As though the mountain itself had taken a deep breath after centuries of waiting. Beyond lay a breathtaking sanctuary untouched by time. Ancient cedar trees somehow flourished beneath a ceiling of glowing crystal. Snowflakes drifted gently through shafts of pale blue light, although no storm existed overhead. A quiet river flowed beneath perfectly clear ice without ever freezing completely. Dozens of white wolves rested peacefully throughout the sanctuary, some old, some young. Several tiny pups looked curiously toward the newcomers before hiding behind larger guardians. Alara's eyes filled with tears. They survived. Fen walked into the sanctuary. Instantly, every wolf stood. Not one growled, not one challenged him. Then, to Kaelin's complete astonishment, every wolf turned toward Alara. One by one, they bowed, not in obedience, in welcome. Far above the caverns, the royal fortress buzzed with unease. Captain Darius had returned briefly to report the king's disappearance. Inside the council chamber, voices rose in panic. Lady Seraphine remained remarkably calm. She slowly circled the great map of Frostvale. The king enters forgotten caves. She smiled faintly. He follows wolves. Several nobles exchanged worried glances. This cannot be allowed. Another counselor frowned. What do you suggest? Seraphine stopped beside the frozen river marked on the map. Fear spreads quickly. She looked around the chamber. And frightened people are easily guided. Her elegant fingers rested on the northern territories. If those beasts have truly returned. She allowed the silence to linger. Then someone must convince the kingdom they are not guardians. They are invaders. The oldest noble hesitated. But if His Majesty disagrees, Seraphine's smile never changed, then perhaps His Majesty has also been deceived. The first seeds of division had been planted. Meanwhile, deeper within the sanctuary, Elder Rowan finally arrived after following the hidden trail left by the royal guards. The elderly scholar stopped the moment he entered. His walking staff slipped from his trembling fingers. No. His voice cracked. It still exists. He slowly approached the glowing stone altar standing at the sanctuary's center. Dusting away centuries of frost, he uncovered another ancient inscription. Unlike the runes upon the great door, these remained perfectly preserved. Rowan read slowly. Each sentence stole the color from his face. My king. Kaelin stepped beside him. What does it say? Rowan swallowed hard. It explains why the crossing remained closed. He continued reading. Strength alone cannot restore winter. His finger moved downward. Royal blood cannot command these guardians. Another line. Only an unbroken promise freely chosen can awaken the bond. Silence settled over everyone. Then Rowan looked directly at Alara. 12 winters. His eyes glistened. You returned here every single year. Alara nodded quietly. I promised. The old scholar smiled sadly. That, he looked toward the waiting wolves, is why they returned. Kaelin remained silent. Everything he had believed about power suddenly felt smaller. His armies, his crown, his authority. None of it had opened this forgotten sanctuary. A lonely Omega carrying food through snow had accomplished what generations of kings never could. Not because she was stronger, because she had remained faithful when no one was watching. For the first time, Kaelin looked at Alara not as a common villager, nor as an unusual witness, but as someone whose quiet courage had changed the fate of an entire kingdom. Before he could speak, a deep growl echoed softly across the sanctuary. An elderly white wolf slowly approached. Age had silvered his muzzle. Clouds covered one eye, yet dignity surrounded every careful step. He stopped before Alara. His gaze rested upon the crescent pendant hanging around her neck. His breathing suddenly trembled. Very gently. The old wolf lowered his head until his nose touched the pendant. Then he released a mournful cry unlike any sound Alara had ever heard. It wasn't grief alone. It was recognition. The old guardian knew exactly who that pendant had once belonged to. And if he recognized the pendant, then he must have known the people who gave it to her. Alara's heartbeat quickened. For the first time in her life, she realized someone here might know the truth about her parents. The elderly wolf looked into Alara's tear-filled eyes, then slowly turned toward a narrow passage hidden behind the sanctuary. Without hesitation, he began walking into the darkness, pausing only once to make sure she was following, toward the answers she had waited for since the day her parents disappeared. The elderly wolf disappeared into the narrow passage without looking back. Alara hesitated only for a heartbeat before following. Kaelin instinctively moved beside her, not ahead, not behind, beside. The gesture was so natural that neither of them noticed it, but Elder Rowan did. A faint smile touched the old scholar's weathered face. Respect had quietly become partnership. The hidden passage twisted deep beneath the sanctuary. Unlike the brilliant crystal caverns, these tunnels were older, carved by hands rather than ice. Ancient torches, somehow still burning with pale blue flames, lined the walls. The air carried the scent of cedar and snow. It felt strangely familiar, as though someone had once called this place home. The old wolf finally stopped before a pair of towering stone doors engraved with two intertwined wolves beneath a crescent moon. No locks, no chains, only silence. The guardian placed one aged paw against the stone. The doors slowly opened. A warm breath of air drifted from within. Alara stepped inside. The chamber stole every word from her lips. It was not a throne room, nor a treasury. It was a memorial. Hundreds of names had been carved into smooth white stone that circled the room like an endless ring. Each name rested beneath the symbol of a wolf. Each symbol represented a guardian who had once protected the frozen crossing. At the chamber's center stood two marble statues, a man, a woman. Both wore traveling cloaks instead of royal robes. Between them sat a small stone wolf pup. The woman held a familiar crescent pendant in her carved hands. Alara's breath caught. My pendant. Elder Rowan slowly approached. His fingers trembled as he brushed centuries of frost from the base of the statues. Two names emerged: Alden Ashwin, Lyra Ashwin. Alara's knees weakened. She barely whispered, "My parents." The elderly wolf walked beside the statues before lowering himself onto the floor. His clouded eyes never left Alara. There was no doubt he had known them. For several long moments, no one spoke. The only sound came from the gentle crackling of the eternal blue flames. Finally, Elder Rowan broke the silence. The kingdom believed your parents abandoned Frostvale. His voice echoed softly through the memorial hall. That was never true. He uncovered another stone tablet resting beneath the statues. Ancient writing stretched across its surface. This time, Rowan translated every word carefully. After the great betrayal, the surviving guardians swore that the crossing would never again open through power. He continued, it would awaken only when someone returned out of love instead of duty. Kalen lowered his gaze. So the crossing remained sealed. Rowan nodded. For generations. He looked toward Alara. Your parents became the last human guardians. Alara listened in silence. They knew ambitious nobles had begun searching for the sanctuary. If those men found it. Rowan's voice grew heavy. They would have enslaved the Winter Pack. The old scholar looked around the chamber. So Alden and Lyra made the hardest choice imaginable. Kalen already knew the answer. They sealed the crossing. Rowan nodded. From both sides. Ilara's heart pounded painfully. What happened to them? The elderly wolf slowly stood. Without a sound, he walked behind the statues toward the rear wall. There, hidden beneath layers of crystal frost, rested two simple stone graves. No royal symbols, no elaborate carvings, only fresh white flowers. Flowers that could not possibly have survived underground for decades. The Winter Pack had cared for them all these years. Tears blurred Alara's vision. They never left me. Her voice broke. They stayed here. Fen quietly approached from behind. The great wolf rested his massive head gently against her shoulder, not to comfort her, to grieve with her. Ilara dropped to her knees between the graves. She finally understood. Her parents had not chosen the wolves instead of their daughter. They had chosen to protect both. If they had opened the crossing, war would have destroyed everything. The old guardian wolf slowly nudged a small wooden box toward her. Its hinges creaked with age. Inside rested carefully preserved letters, a tiny knitted scarf, a child's wooden carving of a wolf, and one folded piece of parchment. Her name covered the front. For Alara. With trembling hands, she unfolded it. The handwriting was soft. Steady. Her mother's. If you are reading this, then Winter has finally trusted the world again. We never wanted you to carry our burden. We wanted you to carry our kindness. Do not reopen old wounds through revenge. Heal them through compassion. If the wolves choose you one day, follow them. They will lead you home. Ilara could read no further. Tears streamed freely down her face. For 12 years, she had believed herself abandoned. Now she realized she had been loved every single day. Kaelin quietly stepped away, giving her space. He stared toward the memorial wall. Every lesson he had learned as a prince echoed differently now. His ancestors had celebrated victory over mythical beasts. But victory over whom? Guardians? Friends? He looked toward Fen. The scarred wolf simply watched Ilara. Not demanding loyalty, offering it. Kaelin slowly removed the Frostmane medallion from around his neck. He walked to the two graves, then placed it gently beside them. Captain Darius watched in stunned silence. My king. Kaelin spoke without turning. My father searched for truth. He looked toward Alden and Lyra's memorial. I intend to finish what he began. It was not a declaration of war. It was a promise. Fen bowed his head. For the first time. The great wolf accepted the king, not because of his crown, because of his choice. Far above the sanctuary, another promise was being broken. Lady Seraphine stood inside the royal archives surrounded by frightened nobles. Ancient maps covered the great oak table. One scroll lay open before her, the Treaty of Winter. The forgotten agreement between Frostvale and the Winter Pack. If this reaches the people, one noble whispered, everything changes. Seraphine's expression hardened. Exactly. She carefully rolled the treaty closed. The kingdom does not need forgotten history. It needs certainty. Wrapping the priceless document beneath her cloak, she slipped into the shadows. Outside the castle walls, loyal riders already waited. The northern gate is clear, my lady. She mounted her horse. No one must know where I'm going. The riders disappeared into the blizzard. Far behind them, the bells of Frostvale Castle began ringing. The king had not yet returned, and before sunrise, the only proof capable of preventing civil war would be in the hands of the woman determined to erase it forever. As dawn broke over Frostvale, Ilara stepped out of the hidden sanctuary, carrying her mother's final letter. At that same moment, Lady Seraphine galloped toward the eastern cliffs with the ancient Treaty of Winter hidden beneath her cloak. If the treaty was destroyed before the kingdom learned the truth, centuries of lies would become permanent, and everything Ilara's parents had died to protect would vanish with it. By the time the sun climbed above Frostvale's snow-covered peaks, the kingdom was already dividing itself. Rumors traveled faster than horses. Some claimed monsters had crossed the frozen river. Others insisted the Alpha King had fallen under an ancient curse. Still others whispered that an Omega had bewitched the legendary Winter Pack. Fear was spreading exactly as Lady Seraphine had intended. She rode without stopping. The ancient Treaty of Winter rested beneath her cloak, wrapped tightly against the snowstorm. Every mile carried her closer to the eastern cliffs, where an abandoned signal tower overlooked a gorge so deep that nothing thrown into it had ever been recovered. Behind her, 3 loyal riders urged their horses onward. "My lady," one called through the wind, "the king's scouts are following us." "They're too late," her voice remained calm. "Once the treaty is gone, history belongs to whoever tells it." She pressed her horse harder. Far behind them, Kaelin emerged from the sanctuary beside Ilara. Fen walked quietly between them. The Winter Pack followed in perfect silence. Captain Darius rode toward the king at full speed. "My king," Kaelin turned. "What is it?" "The royal archives have been broken into." Darius dismounted. "The Treaty of Winter is missing." Elder Rowan closed his eyes. "So." He sighed heavily. Seraphine has finally made her choice. Kaelin looked toward the eastern mountains. If she destroys that treaty, the truth dies with it, Rowan finished. For a brief moment the valley fell silent. Then Fen lifted his scarred head. His blue eyes turned toward the eastern cliffs without hesitation. He began running. The entire winter pack followed. Kalen understood immediately. They know where she's going. He mounted his horse. Ride! The chase swept across frozen valleys, through snow-laden forests, and over icy ridges where the wind howled like ancient spirits. Royal cavalry struggled through the deep snow. The wolves did not. They flowed across the landscape with effortless grace, disappearing among drifting blizzards before reappearing far ahead. Alara urged her horse onward, clutching her mother's letter beneath her cloak. She wasn't racing to save an old document. She was racing to protect the truth her parents had given their lives to preserve. Hours later. The eastern signal tower emerged through the storm. Lady Seraphine already stood upon its crumbling stone platform overlooking the endless gorge. She smiled as Kalen and Alara arrived. So, her voice echoed through the icy wind. The Forgotten Guardians finally return. Kalen stepped forward. Give me the treaty. She laughed softly. No. You want to rewrite history. I want to free it. She slowly removed the weathered scroll. This kingdom needs certainty. Not fairy tales, Alara spoke quietly. They aren't fairy tales. Seraphine's eyes narrowed. They're dangerous. She looked toward the waiting wolves. Look at them. Today, they bow. What happens tomorrow? What happens when they decide humans no longer deserve this kingdom? Fen met her gaze. He did not growl. He simply stood beside Alara. His silence answered louder than words. Kalen removed his sword, then, to everyone's astonishment, he dropped it onto the snow. I won't defend lies with steel. The guards looked at one another in disbelief. Even Seraphine hesitated. Kalen took another slow step. My ancestors failed these guardians. I will not. For the first time, fear crossed Seraphine's face. Not fear of wolves, fear of losing control. With a cry of frustration, she turned toward the gorge. If history cannot belong to me, she raised the treaty high above the abyss. It belongs to no one. Before she could throw it, a white blur crossed the snow. Fen. The great wolf never touched Seraphine. Instead, he struck the sleeve of her cloak with precise force. The treaty slipped from her fingers. The wind caught it. The ancient scroll spun wildly over the cliff. Alara's heart stopped. No. Without thinking, she ran. Kalen reached for her. Alara! But she was already moving. She threw herself across the icy ground. Her fingertips caught the edge of the fluttering scroll just before it disappeared into the gorge. The frozen earth beneath her cracked. A jagged fracture raced toward the cliff's edge. Kalen dove. His hand seized Alara's wrist. The ice collapsed beneath them. For one terrifying instant, they both hung above the endless abyss. The scroll remained trapped beneath Alara's free hand. She could have released it, saved herself, instead. She held on. Kalen understood. Slowly, with Captain Darius pulling from behind, he lifted her back onto solid ground. The treaty survived. So did the truth. Seraphine fell to her knees. She had lost. Not to strength, to courage. 3 days later, every citizen of Frostvale gathered before the royal fortress. Snow covered the great square. The winter pack stood silently beside the platform. No chains, no cages, only trust. Elder Rowan read the Treaty of Winter aloud. Every word echoed across the silent kingdom. The people learned of the ancient alliance. They learned of the betrayal. They learned that Alden and Lyra Ashwin had died protecting both kingdoms, and they learned that one lonely Omega had unknowingly fulfilled the final promise by returning to the frozen river every winter without asking for recognition. No one spoke. Many wept. Those who had mocked Alara lowered their heads in shame. Kalen stepped before the crowd. For generations, he said calmly, we honored power. He looked toward Alara. Today, we honor faith. He turned toward the wolves. From this day forward, the Winter Pack shall never again be called beasts. They are our guardians. A roar of approval spread through the square. Not forced, earned. Then something extraordinary happened. Fen walked through the crowd. Thousands watched in complete silence. The great white wolf stopped before Alara. Very gently, he lowered his massive head beneath her hand. One by one, every wolf followed. Then the warriors, then the elders. Finally, Kalen himself bowed his head, not as a king surrendering his crown, but as a man honoring the woman who had reminded an entire kingdom that kindness could outlast fear. Ilara's eyes filled with tears. She had waited 12 winters beside a silent river. She had believed no one remembered. She had been wrong. Winter had remembered. The wolves had remembered. And now, the entire kingdom remembered too. Months later, spring arrived in Frostvale for the first time in generations without fear. Children laughed beside wolves. Omegas were honored as keepers of winter. The frozen river flowed freely once more, no longer separating kingdoms but connecting them. Each first snowfall, Alara still walked to the river carrying a small basket of food. Not because she was waiting, because hope deserved to be remembered. Sometimes Kalen walked beside her. Sometimes Fen reached the river first. No words were needed. Their quiet companionship said everything. On the final morning of winter, Fen paused on the opposite bank and looked toward the distant northern mountains. Faint howls answered his own. The old guardian simply smiled in the only way wolves could. Beyond the horizon, other forgotten packs had awakened. Other stories were waiting. But this one had found its ending, not with a battle, not with revenge, but with a promise that one lonely girl had kept long enough for an entire kingdom to believe in it again.